We know that educating children is a really hard task, and because it's a really hard task, sometimes as educators we feel like we have impossible choices to make. We can either support most of our students to be as successful as possible, or we can put an incredible amount of support into helping the students who are furthest behind. In reality though, this is a false binary. There is a third option that exists. Rather than focusing on either the students who need the most or the students who are closest to success, we have the option to do both at the same time, and that's what I propose. There exists a third option. We can design schools that work for all of our students, and we do that by centering the needs of the students who are furthest at the margins, the students who are least likely to be successful traditionally. When we do that, it doesn't mean that we don't care about other students. It doesn't mean that we're no longer going to focus on other students. It just means that we're going to bring a higher level of creativity and a higher level of skill to meeting their needs. And that creativity, that skill, that's going to help us educate all students better. So I want you to consider a student at your school who isn't being as successful as you would like for them to be. I want you to imagine that you're able to create a school that works for that student. Really think about this. What would their day look like? What would their teachers do differently? How would the school culture as a whole shift to being more inclusive and respectful of their needs? How might you and teachers partner differently with their parents or other specialized providers? If your school can develop the skills to work with a student who's not successful better, it can do that for all students. We all do better when we all do better. If students are less disruptive, other students will do better. If teachers are better able to meet the needs of students who struggle in multiple ways, they're better able to meet the needs of students who struggle in maybe just one or two ways. If a school culture is truly inclusive and can celebrate every student in the building, every student in that building will succeed. By focusing on our energy and our creativity on where the greatest barriers are, we unlock the opportunity to serve all students better. We create schools that belong to their students. And perhaps more importantly, if we can create schools that belong to all of their students, then we can transform society. Schools are a reflection of our society as a whole. They represent the full diversity that exists in the world. If we can create on a small scale a place where all students can succeed and be supported to their greatest potential, what can we do to transform society as a result? What I'm suggesting may sound impossible, but research shows that it actually does happen. That schools who are better able to serve the students who are furthest from meeting their goals are better to serve all students. If we can teach the student who's hardest to reach, we can teach every student. Traditionally, there are a couple of different ways that we think about supporting students to succeed. One approach is called the universalist approach, where we set a big universal goal that we hope all students will meet. If we don't have pathways to actually ensure that every student can meet it, it's just a goal in theory, and the reality is that the students who weren't succeeding still won't succeed. The other approach is a targeted approach, where we provide services only to some students, those students who've been identified as needing more. This means a few things. First, it means that those students likely have already experienced a great amount of failure. By the time they come to us for support, not only have they struggled long enough to benefit from it, they've also experienced the stigma and hardship that comes from not doing well in school. The other challenge with a targeted approach is that we put the ownership on developing expertise to work with students who struggle on a small number of specialists. When we do that, we create a system in which we're always going to be dependent on those specialists. Our teachers and our classrooms are not going to be set up to support every student, and so year after year, child after child, we're going to need this separate and often unequal system to educate the students who are not being well supported in our classrooms. Researchers have also shown us that a third way is possible, something that at UC Berkeley has been called the targeted universalist approach. The targeted universalist approach combines these two ideas: a big, ambitious universal goal and the targeted pathways that allow every student to get there. UC Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute defines the targeted universalist approach and gives us several steps that we have to follow. The first step is to set that big, ambitious, universal goal. As an example, you might have a group of third graders in your school, and you want all third graders to be able to write a comprehensive analytic essay by the end of the year. You're going to set that goal early on, and you're going to define what success looks like. You might even find an essay that's an example of the sort of essay that you want all students to have. You might create a rubric that shows you what elements such an essay would have. And then you'll assess students to see how close they are to currently meeting that goal. And you'll find that there are some students who are already very close to meeting the goal and will likely benefit from whatever supports we put in place. You'll also find that other students will require targeted supports. That's where the third step comes in. You've defined your goal, you've assessed students, and now you need to figure out what supports you can put in place. Some students might need help organizing their ideas so that they can write a comprehensive essay on a specific subject. Other students might need help in spelling or grammar so that they can convey their ideas successfully in writing. And other students will need all of those supports and other individualized supports as well. Now that we know what our students need, we can begin to create plans to address those needs. First, we look at the lists that show us which students are likely to require additional help. With each of those lists, we can take a look at the number of students who need help and any factors they have in common. We might notice that almost all of our students need a particular type of support, and that's going to help us work with our teachers to strategize which things will be incorporated as daily routines in our classrooms, benefiting all students through repetition and routine. We'll then find that there are other lists that are smaller. There's maybe only a smaller group of students who needs a particular type of writing support. Here we have a lot of options. One thing that we might consider doing is having teachers rotate students throughout their class. They might work with small groups intensively while the other students do something independently, and in that way be able to provide targeted support to meet that universal goal. We can get really creative here. That's the objective. We want to find ways to find success for students who've never found them before. You might have a group of third grade teachers who are creative enough that you're going to actually work with all of them at the same time. You'll have one teacher supporting the students who are closest to achieving the goal, and they might have a really large number of students. While at the same time, you might have your other teachers working with smaller groups and providing that individualized support so that they can benefit as well. And what about those students who struggle the most? Because we're more aware of what their needs are and we're continually assessing, we can adapt our plans as we get to know their needs better. And because this is done by our teachers with support from specialists in designing the plans, our teachers are going to get even better over time. So that for every student they can support today, there's a whole line of students they'll be able to support next year and in the years that come after that. This targeted universalist approach unlocks the opportunity to creating schools that operate really differently than we're used to. Schools in which we prioritize the belonging of all students in all classroom spaces, and then we build in the supports that it takes for them to be successful. Students who are furthest away from opportunity now have the chance to take risks and see themselves as learners and scholars. They learn that they have more in common with other students than they previously thought. They're least likely to disrupt classrooms, and they're more likely to continue and persist in their education because they feel like it was something that belonged to them all along. The students who were most successful to begin with learn that they are a part of a thriving, vibrant community, and they know that even when they struggle in the future, they will still have membership in the community. They grow compassionate, they grow understanding and respect, and they learn how to become part of a society that works for all of its members. There are definitely challenges that come with this approach, and the biggest one is that we're asking teachers and school leaders to think really differently about their job. We often think that we're successful if we meet the needs of most students, and so we look at the success of most students in determining our success. When you're really asking folks to consider the success of the students who are traditionally the least successful, that can bring up a lot of feelings. It's really hard to confront the things that are most difficult for us to do. It's really hard to function at the edge of our skills and capacity. And that comes against a tradition that we've had in schools for a really long time. That means that it's important to go slow. It's important to be really humanizing of the teachers and the educators that are involved, and the fact that you're asking them to do school in a very, very different way. And that's not an easy ask to make of folks. It's easier at schools that are higher resourced. Oftentimes those schools are already spending a lot of money on the students who are furthest from opportunity, and now you're asking them to spend it differently, but you're not asking them to spend more necessarily. And so, for instance, if you have a school where there already are a number of special educators, there might be even one-on-one aides for students who are far behind, school psychologists and counselors. You're asking those folks to organize the professionals differently, but the professionals are already there. It's easier to do. That doesn't mean that it's not possible to do this at schools that are less resourced, and it's actually probably even more important because in those schools there isn't a safety net. There aren't a whole team of experts and professionals that are waiting to meet the needs of students. There are just those folks who show up every day, often the teachers and the school leader. And so the needs are greater and the resources are smaller. But it's a really good reason to invest in a mind shift, in a way of going away from this zero-sum thinking of it's this group of students versus that group of students, to a really more inclusive way of thinking. Because when teachers still have students in their classroom that are disruptive or have challenging behaviors or just are not performing academically and not able to keep up, that takes that can be a burden on teachers. That can be a burden on entire classrooms. And again, that can come at the real as a real threat to teachers' sense of efficacy and success. And so helping those teachers in these least resource schools really think of their jobs as to be creative and imaginative and to constantly track the success of the students who are performing the least well can actually give them some opportunity to really recognize that this work is hard and that the needs of those students is something that's in their capacity to meet. It doesn't happen overnight. It's one of the reasons that the approach is most effective years in the making, because for every year that you learn a few skills or you work better with a couple types of challenging behaviors or academic needs, the following year you can continue to focus on other needs. But it does really free up teachers to feel like they have the skills and the capacity to meet the needs of all students.